Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Happiness Journey with drdan podcast, where every journey is worth living. My name is Dr. Dan, and I'm your host for today's episode. I'm a bilingual cognitive behavior psychotherapist specializing in anger management issues, both court-appointed and private, marriage counseling using the EFT method, dissociative disorders, narcissistic personality disorders, depression, anxiety, dream analysis, and also provide life, business, and retirement coaching support. I provide individual one-on-one sessions in both French or English, and also do group settings. If you need any assistance, reach out to DMV therapy and coaching services at 301-325-1550. And our website can be found at lifecoach.drdanamzallag.com. Today, I'm very excited to have for our 10th and last episode of season 10, a very special guest, mentor, and trainer, Dan Howington. And just like every of my past episode, I will leave it up to the guests to properly introduce themselves, as no one can do a better job. Dan, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Dr. Dan. It's a pleasure to be here. It's hard to follow in those footsteps. I'm jealous of your background. I'm jealous of the work you do. It's interesting that you've given me a chance to speak with you when you talk about anger management. Certainly something I have struggled with in my life, that I've learned how to. I've learned the reasons for that, I think, and how to overcome that. But had a long career as a sales professional. And my last stint really was with IBM. I was a sales leader with IBM. I trained, spoke publicly, and motivated a bunch of sales reps around the country for IBM, and made the decision in my life that that's what brought me joy and that's what brought me pleasure, was helping people understand how incredibly powerful they are and how they really have the opportunity to paint their own life, And I think what scares us sometimes is our light more than our darkness. We're afraid if we accept our divinity that we'll somehow still fall short. And that stops us from really living the life of our dreams, because we're living in fear of who we really are and how powerful we are. And so I've got some formal training. I'm an interventionist under Tony Robbins and Chloe Madonis. And it's a very strong curriculum, in my opinion, that really just formalizes the different processes, steps, and techniques to helping people clarify where they are, really inventory what's important to them, and identify those things that are stopping them from living the life that they deserve. I use something called the divine ideal, and that's where we talk about the different roles that people play in their lives, as a professional, as we are, as husbands, as fathers, as spouses, as brothers, as colleagues, as peers. We have to live under a combined feeling of self, of who we are. And I try to teach people to clarify what their destiny would look like if they were to fulfill that in every way. If they used all of their God-given potential and they reached their highest level, what would that look like and feel like and smell like, and who would be there and what would they be doing? And the more I think we live our lives with that ideal in our mind, the more we are driven to imitate people that we admire. So admiration, right, opens the path to imitation, and it gives us a chance to rise above what we feel are our limitations. So that's what I'm doing. I enjoy it. It brings me a lot of joy. And, I'm very emotional. Sometimes I get too engaged with people, and I care a lot about, them being happy, man. It's something I know in your work, you run into people, as I do, that you're just, they're so much in their own way. And you just see so much potential and think, man, what a wonderful, beautiful, intelligent, funny person you are, let go, right? And see how high you can rise. So that's probably a long introduction, Doc.
Well, it's a good introduction. Thank you so much for being on our show, and people like you to come and contribute their own experience and knowledge to our listeners is definitely very much appreciated. Because you see, the thing is, then a lot of people, as you mentioned, they have limiting belief. Even though they've accomplished a lot in their lives, they still feel they're not good enough, or they criticize themselves too much, that they don't really see anything positive coming out of their life. And those who are struggling, and I mean, I'm sure that you're familiar with the laws of attraction, thoughts become things, but however, it's hard to be able to change a mindset. Now, changing that mindset will require like a complete reboot of their central system. I would say their CPU. But then again, they're too afraid of doing it because they fear the unknown, as just mentioned earlier.
Right.
So how do you go around that to teach them how to start looking at things with a different parallels?
Right. Well, I try to start with people by saying, what is your emotional state, right? So let's define that first. Are you despairing? Are you sad? Are you manic? Are you frustrated and angry, which, was a lot of my early years, being very frustrated and angry, and then I try to define that emotional state, their focus, what has meaning in their life at the current point in time, because that can change, as you know.
Mhm.
Often what's meaningful at 1 month may be not as meaningful. I mean, your top three are important. What has meaning in your life? What has value? And then map out relationships. We are a very tactile animal.
Right.
We shake hands. It's very primal. We pat each other on the back. We dance when we are being affectionate. We hold each other close. It's as people, we have to be aware of those relationships where we're involved and we're touching others and that bring us joy. And we also have to be aware of those that are negative and hold us back. And then the way I work, getting past some of these barriers, is I try to identify one small thing, one small step, one small change that will begin to show benefits and will begin to put people on a positive path, right? And when we can do that over a period of weeks and maybe a few months, we start to add to that. We build on a success. We identify the foundation. We architect what we want things to be, and we start one thing at a time. So one small change often gets people on the right track. And it also helps, as you know, I'm sure in your practice, right? Self-discipline. The more you do it, the better you get at it.
Yes.
And so when you decide you have to be aware, become very self-aware, and you
Mhm.
have to identify these feelings that you don't like, that are negative. When they begin, what's causing that? How can I interrupt that and get in front of that?
Mhm.
And that's really the only way to start building new neural pathways, so that you're not running the same way, reacting the same way. And I know again, I keep going back to you because it's talking with you. I know I'm saying things you already know, right? But it's like this cognitive science tells us our brain really wants to become as efficient as possible with the energy that we have. And so we learn certain ways of reacting, and it becomes part of our decision-making system, our body, our physiology, our emotions, our brain. It all works as one thing. And as we start to step in front of that and short circuit that in order to create a new response, there's discomfort, there's unease. And there's where that fear, you have to recognize that fear is going to show up, and give it some kind of I tell my clients, give it some kind of silly name, like the change fear, or the oh no fear, or something silly, because it robs it of power when you label it like that, right?
That's true.
And so that's the way I begin working with people. And I always try to, I use values and actions, the 24 character strengths assessment, which comes out of positive psychology, that they've been doing research on for the last 10 years around these character strengths. And it helps people to form anchors about who they are and what they're good at.
Okay.
And sometimes people don't have that, and a lot of that is missing that personal connection with someone that reminds them of how great they are, of how kind they are,
Mhm.
of how smart they are, how funny they are, right? How irreverent they are, whatever those things are that make us uniquely who we are. People need to hear that and be reminded of that. And if you have to do that on your own, the assessment is a good way to do that. And so that's the way I began working with people.
Okay, so now we have the equation at 50% solved. Now let's say we can control or change our mindset. How about if we are involved with people who are very toxic, very negative? Now we're talking about trying to change someone else's mindset, which becomes very much complicated. So how do we approach that? You cannot just, because my brother or my sister or my significant other are toxic, I'm not going to separate myself from them. So how do you work around that?
Well, so there's two levels, I think, at least for me. There's probably more if you want to, get more complicated or get more in depth. But for me, it's like if I'm going to be constantly interacting with that person, I have to decide what I can control and what I can't control. And I like to use there's a formula. I want to say, I know that Urban Meyer, when he was head coach at the Ohio State Buckeyes, used it, right? I know he's sort of fallen out of favor, but the guy is still very talented. He's got a lot of accomplishments under his belt. And when he was leading the Buckeyes to national championships, he used a little formula called E plus R equals O. And the E is the event and the O is outcome, right? And so in our minds, and that's where the divine ideal, the concept of the highest intent, your divine ideal comes into play. I'm interacting with my ex-wife, for example, and we're talking about things that are uncomfortable. She's very whatever. There's a lot of toxic energy there. The outcome I want is I want to be the best parent that I can be for my children. I want to model the best behavior I can when faced with difficult circumstances. So that's the outcome that I want. So whatever event happens, these things that are out of my control in the world, other people and the way they act and the way they treat me, when they do those things, the only thing I can control is my response, and that's the R. So it's the event plus my response that determines the outcome that I want. And if you keep that in mind, I believe 99% of the stress that we feel comes from, well, two things, let's say. But one of those is trying to control those things we can't control. And as a young man, I was convinced I was going to have a heart attack in Atlanta traffic, trying to get to customers, trying to get to meetings, driven really by a need for significance. So I wanted to win and be somebody, And so here I am in traffic, completely out of my control on 285. If you're familiar with that, it's a perimeter highway. It's like the Beltway in Washington, D.C. Very difficult to get off of once you're on it. In any case, trying to will, the traffic to move, trying to, if I think it positively enough, it will happen, right? And so that's when I began to do some research on how I could control the negativity in my own life and how I could determine how to be positive and how to accept those things I cannot change. And that made a difference, a huge difference in my life. So that's one thing, is understand the response is all you can control, and to own that with some authority and some accountability. So we're not perfect. We'll never be perfect. There are going to be times that our response is unacceptable, right? That's not what we want. And so we look at that and we figure out, we make a deal with ourselves. The next time I'm going to handle that better. And so you begin to build up some resilience to the E's that you can't control, which is, almost 100% of them, right? Can't control it. I control how I respond, and that leads to the outcome that we want. And the second thing that gives us stress is really comparison. I think it's some Asian scholars, I want to say it's that it was Confucius, but I'm not sure. I haven't been able to verify that. I've looked hard, and I think maybe it wasn't him. Maybe it was someone else. Yeah, all unhappiness come through comparison. So when you are looking to judge yourself by how someone else is doing, regardless of where we are, there's always somebody that's doing better if you're looking at life that way. You have to learn to accept yourself and love yourself and understand if you are above where you were, if you're doing better than you were, if you're grateful for the things that you have, and you have the self-awareness to try and improve those places where you're falling short, you're way, way, way up the ladder of being close to as good as you can be, So that was a long answer for you, but that's how I tell my clients to start instantiating that. I have a little wristband I give them. It's E plus R equals O, and it's own your response, and wear that for a while. If you're really struggling, and a lot of people do, wear that for a while. Remind yourself of that, and use that as an acronym to not let other people steal your joy, or determine your joy, right?
Yes.
So,
but here's where I see the biggest challenge in your theory or practicality, whatever you want to call it. We're so bombarded with social media and fake success that you see online, it is hard to be able to detach yourself and not compare ourselves with other people who succeeded better or even fake their success online.
Right.
So then you deliberately say to separate completely from the world, because this is what we're going to face on a day-to-day basis. So how can we cut ourselves from comparison, but yet still live with this environment that we're in?
Well, that's a good point. I mean, I think you have to control what you see, and you have to understand what you're seeing is the shiny upside of everybody's life. Nobody goes on, they don't go on social media and they talk about their drug addicted daughter or their,
No.
or their whatever, without veering too much into what people might find objectionable, whatever is going on in their life that is not healthy, that is not positive. I know when I was younger, and I would not sleep enough and drink too much, and I was never happy until something else happened outside of my life. Someone else did something, or I acquired something material that I thought would raise my my value in the eyes of others. When you look to others to validate yourself, I think that's when you're most vulnerable to comparison.
Mhm.
I think when you have a good solid concept of who you are, what you value, and what's important to you, and what success and happiness means to you, you're less susceptible to envy, if you will, and to I'm not as good as that person. It's sort of like when you ask somebody, are they successful? And they say, I've got $2 million in the bank. I'm married, I've got 2.5 kids, and I've got a dog, and I'm a member of the blah, blah country club, and I drive whatever the car is, a Tesla, whatever,
Excellent.
right, whatever it is. When you get people that are ticking off the check boxes of materialism or external cues and telling you that's why they're happy or that's why they're successful, then you have to ask, but are you happy? Are you fulfilled? Do you live a life of joy? Are you authentic? Are you willing to be silly in front of people you don't know? Are you willing to, do you have the courage to stand up and disagree respectfully? But or are you so intent on conforming to somebody else's definition of success and happiness that you don't even know what yours is? I ask, sometimes one of the things I'll do when I do things like your podcast or I'll write something on LinkedIn occasionally, something like that. I'll ask people, whose life are you living? Whose life are you living? When you set a goal and your standard, let's say the standard is I want to be successful. And you look at how do you define success? Is it your definition of success? Is it your dad's or your mom's? Is it your wife's, your kids? You really have to look. There are 5.5 billion, I think that's the number of people on the planet. There's that many definitions of success. There are a lot of ways to live this life and be fulfilled and be happy and be successful. And in my view, my kids will all the time, they'll talk to me and go, Daddy, are we going to have any money left when you die? And I'm like, well, I hope not. I hope I spend it all. When I hope my last breath, I want to have a Dairy Queen, what are those ice cream things? I want to spend my last dollar when I'm passing on. But I consider myself incredibly rich. I have a wife I love. I have children I love. And they love me. I'm not. Sometimes I wonder, if I deserve it. I think we all go through those things. But I have learned that getting into a peeing contest with everybody and trying to measure my happiness against them is not the definition of success. If I was Elon Musk and had every material thing that he has, or whoever, Jeff Bezos or any of those guys, and had all that money and all that, and you were unhappy, are you successful? And my statement is no.
No, that's true.
No, you're not. You have to be happy in order to be successful. And so that requires you thinking about what makes you happy, trying to spend time in situations with people that elevate you and help you feel good about who you are. So you're talking about toxic people. if they're not helping you feel good about who you are, then don't allow them into your tribe. I always say your tribe determines your vibe. So if you're hanging out with people that are down, don't let them bring you down, man. There are people out there who will suck the joy out of every moment, if you will.
Oh, yes. Yes.
And those are people you can still love. You may have a child sometimes your children go through periods where you're like, boy, I love them, but I just don't like them. They make me feel bad when I hang around them, So you love them from afar. I love you. If you ever need me, I'll be there, but I don't want to hang out with you because you're right now, you're just a dark cloud.
Yes. And so, misery attracts misery, Dan.
That's right.
Also,
if you don't agree with the reasons they're miserable, often they become angry at you. And often they will say you're being judgmental because what you're telling me is my feelings aren't valid. I'm not saying that. I'm saying the reasons for your feelings might be something you need to look at because, you're allowing external things to determine your mood, right? We do. And we all do that way too often. So,
but the thing is, Dan, I think the big issue is that a lot of people fear looking too deep into themselves because they're afraid what they're going to find. And then we're talking about spiritual, we're talking about emotional, and sometimes they just like live their life like zombies. They just go with the motion. They don't really pay attention to what's going on around them. They focus too much about, as you mentioned before, living the life of someone else. Why, I don't like my life, so I'm going to have to kind of like project that into someone else's. And they continue living this way and never really find happiness. And as you said, it's not about the money. Happiness is what you find in relationships, with friends, with your spouse, with your kids, with your family, whatever it is. That's what wealth is.
Right. No, you're exactly right. I mean, I'm really enjoying having this conversation with you. You bring up such good points. And, I think what it is the fear that if I do my best, what if I do my best and that's still not good enough? If I am so reliant, and I think we as a whole, I think human beings as a whole, for some reason, are very, I don't want to say reliant, it's not the right word, but so driven by a need to be accepted.
Yes.
And it's when you're young, especially, it's dangerous because the people you hang around with, the people that you want to be a part of, even as a young adult, you want to be a part of a group, and that may not be a good group for you. It may not be a good group for anybody.
Yes.
And there may be behaviors that are going on that in your soul are against who you are, but you don't have the courage yet to say, I'm not going to do that. I don't agree with what you're saying. I don't agree with what you're doing. I don't agree with this behavior, because the fear is they're going to say, well, you're no longer a part of our group, right?
Correct.
And so it's very difficult. So that goes into being authentic. Authenticity, I think, is huge, which takes a lot of courage, right? And also the fear that if you try your best and it doesn't work out the way that you want it to, that means you have failed forever. And the reality is we never fail forever.
No.
When you continue to take a step after step, it's not failing, it's learning. And sometimes lessons are incredibly painful. I know I learned some hard lessons when I was young, and it cost me relationships early in my life, marital issues that, I'm sure that my own internal struggles contributed to, and things like that. But there's a point in time you have to be able to look at yourself and say, I'm a pretty good person. I'm a pretty good person. I'm a work in progress, but I've got a good heart. I'm trying hard to treat other people with love and respect. And when I make mistakes, they're coming from a good place. Maybe I'm too aggressive. Maybe I was too assertive. Maybe I was ignorant in a situation. But those things don't mean I have a bad heart. They just mean that I'm not, I haven't been everywhere and done everything already. It's a funny thing about life. You don't learn the lesson until you actually go through the event. Life teaches you the lesson by putting you through it. And once you learn it, I'm not going to do that again.
Yes.
Hopefully. right?
Hopefully, yes. And
But
it's like doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different result is the definition of insanity. And
yeah, right.
surprisingly enough, then they keep doing the same mistake over and over again, and they never really learned from them. And as you mentioned before, when it comes to failure, the acronym FAIL means first attempt in learning.
That's great. That's great.
So,
Yeah. See, I'm taking notes now, Doc.
please do. This is not copyrighted.
I feel like I should be paying for this podcast.
So, and I love the fact everything that you say really goes also in understanding the value of the human being, because this is what I learned in my doctor degree and all, always work with human nature, never against it. But the thing
Right.
that it's hard to really, I mean, it's great to say theoretically, but in practice it's very difficult, because us as human, we want to be a part of a wolf pack. Like if you look at the movie The Hangover, okay?
Right.
Like a part of a group. We fear rejection. We fear not being accepted. So again, we have to think about everything that is being said in this podcast, then have somewhat of a contradiction due to the fact that we want to be accepted, but yet we want to be authentic. We want to be able to say, well, this is not a group I believe in their values, so I'm going to go out of that. But then the fear of being rejected puts someone into a depressive mode. So, it's never ending.
No, you're right. You're right. It's interesting you say that, because when you say doing the same thing, often we are in this because we're always trying to get our needs met, right?
Yes.
And so if our needs are to feel love and connection, sometimes the only way we can get love and connection is by doing something that we know is going to be reprimanded or going to be rejected, or we're going to be corrected. But when we are corrected, that itself is the attention and the love that we need. If we're not corrected, that means the person in our life doesn't care about us.
So true.
And so we get caught in these cycles of, I really want some of your attention, and we don't know a positive way of getting it. And so we act out in a way that's negative. The children parent sort of relationship is often that way. At least when they're younger, right? It's like parents are busy, but the only way you can get their attention is to break something, or smack your brother until he starts crying, or whatever, right? I mean, and it's fascinating to get into the psychology of why we do what we do, and we don't even recognize it, right? And what you're referring to is, you don't have to tell people. You don't have to verbalize. You don't have to explain. You don't owe anybody explanation.
That's true.
If you're hanging out and you don't feel good and you don't like it, you're perfectly within your right to go somewhere else to try something new. So you don't have to finalize there's no social contract. I would say if you've had an in-depth relationship with somebody and somebody's been a great friend of yours, it's worth a conversation. But even then it might be, I've changed, I've matured, I'm just not having as much fun doing that as I used to. You don't have to vilify somebody else's behavior, right? So it's a lot of times it's the way you communicate sort of the separation there that I think it doesn't change the fact that you're removing yourself from the situation, but it doesn't, you're not becoming sort of the judge and, this is unacceptable. Nobody wants to hang out with you guys anyway, because then you're going to invite rejection, right?
Yes,
when you're actually passing judgment, somebody's going to, because they're feeling rejected. So anyway, we can stay away from that whole thing and just decide you're going to do some other things that you're interested in. What I find too, the thing you're talking about when we're talking about authenticity, I personally am drawn to people that are kind of weird and off the beaten path, that are unique in a way, and they're not afraid to be who they are, and there may be some aspects of it that I find uncomfortable, and I'm not afraid to have that discussion, but it's none of my business except that it's me who's feeling uncomfortable. I really want to look at that why. But I like people that are a little bit different, that are a little bit, brash, or a little bit not concerned about being sort of the odd duck out, right? Yes. To me, that is a degree of confidence. I find that attractive. And I think there are a lot of people that are drawn to that. When they know, when you act that way yourself, you give permission to other people to act that way. Correct. When you're able to be, just unabashedly confident or funny or whatever, you give other people permission to be themselves. And so it ends up being, to me, you're kind of drawn into that environment of nonconformity, which I think is exciting in today's culture.
I agree. I agree.
I think it's funny, our culture, in fact, and I know today there's some other elements maybe that are different, but in general, when we talk about organized religion, we talk about organized education, the whole process is intended to take you and shave off any rough edges and sand you down as much as possible so that you fit in the round hole. You might be this big braggadocious square peg and you're happy with who you are. Those institutions and others do their best to wipe all that off of you, to wipe the smile off your face and break you down until you don't like yourself.
Yes.
But hey, you're fitting in the round hole now. See, you fit in. You don't make me uncomfortable anymore trying to be somebody, Dan.
Yes.
And I think there are people out there that experience that. And my hope is that you understand that you need to do the reverse of that. That doesn't mean you have to fly in their face and say, screw you. I'm not going to, doesn't mean you have to do that, but you retain who you are, the uniqueness that you are, and be unapologetic about that. I think you'll find that people will appreciate that.
That is so true. Well, Dan, that is all the time that we have for today's.
You're kidding me. We've only solved one of the world's problems.
One of the world's problems. But I really, really do appreciate you taking the time out of your very busy schedule to join us. And thank you again for participating and inspiring our many listeners with your incredible story. Now, we hope that you've all enjoyed today's episode. And I'm very excited about the many upcoming guests that we have for Schedule 11 of the Happiness Journey podcast, filled with inspirational stories just like the one that you listened today. Now, here are some concluding words of wisdom. Walk with the dreamers, the believers, the courageous, the cheerful, the planners, the doers, the successful people with their heads in the cloud and their feet on the ground. Let the Spirit ignite a fire within you to leave this world better than you found it. Just like all successful people in this world, they all surround themselves with other successful beings. This technique always motivates them to reach greater heights and become as successful as the one they surround themselves with. If you walk into a room and you're the smartest person there, change room and select the one that you can learn something new. More knowledge you acquire, more teaching you can offer. It is imperative that you work on yourself so you can give the best of yourself to humanity so it can benefit from you and grow exponentially. My name is Dr. Dan Amzallag, and you may all keep pursuing your amazing journey in life.